Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Health Coaches Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Davis. I am here with Kelli Walker, who made it really hard for me not to call this the Anxiety Coaches Podcast to introduce there, because Kelli is, we've been friends for several years now. We hosted a show called the Anxiety Coaches Podcast together.
How long ago?
Oh, geez. 6, 7, something years ago that we had. So that's been a while. And we coached together. So this is kind of an interesting conversation to me to have as one of the early episodes of this show, specifically about health coaching, because this is with like really kind of, one of the people that I really, developed into this job with. Kelli and I we had a podcast, and we had a coaching business where we were helping people in one-on-one settings and in group settings, and eventually way too many people in a group setting on our Facebook group, to be able to manage. But so it's been kind of interesting. We've been through a lot of the figuring out how to do this stuff.
Yeah, we really grew together
so
into our coaching roles.
Really grew together. Up as coaches together.
Yeah, we did grow up as coaches.
So Kelli, now you have since then you've got a podcast that you're doing again. You are back in school.
Yeah.
You're coaching.
Yeah.
You had a baby and a twin of that baby
times
same
two
time.
at the same
Yeah.
Times two. Lucky for me, I didn't have any previous babies, so I don't know any different. So
Yeah, I don't know, it makes you really sound like a superhuman to me or something. I mean, combining graduate school, working, coaching, hosting a podcast, and changing 2 pairs of diapers at the same time.
Oh, I can't wait till they're potty trained. We're getting there. It's going to be an epic milestone. But honestly, how I do it is pretty anticlimactic. I have learned since having kids, because as many people who have kids know, there's a lot to juggle and a lot of moving pieces, and time becomes suddenly very scarce. I ask for help all the time. Whoever will give it to me, I ask for the help, whether it's some childcare, whether it's tagging my husband in or having grandma come over, or friends, especially without kids. It's pretty exciting for them to come over and babysit. And I unashamedly use that, and I just ask for help and delegate. That's how I do it. It's nothing special.
Yeah. Well, sometimes even just the skill of being able to ask for help is hard for people.
Oh, as it was for me. And it started when I was pregnant. I had a really complicated pregnancy and was on bed rest for a long time, and thus started my journey of learning to have to ask for help. It was uncomfortable at first, and it was definitely a skill that I had to cultivate, and still sometimes feel a little bit vulnerable, like, just wish I could do it all on my own.
Yeah. I can see that. Have you been able to translate that skill then into your coaching and into your work?
Like working with clients and sort of helping them find the same. Do you mean like helping them find the same sort of time and space and things like that?
Yeah, because that's something that can be really tough for people to do, and yeah. I'm sure that's something that comes up, especially you're working, in the coaching role a lot with anxiety.
Yep.
So I'm sure
it is. And I think what comes up a lot in almost every single session is values. So like helping people move toward their values. And I think there's a lot of, there's when you can kind of define your values and you really know what's important to you, suddenly the path gets a bit clearer as to how, okay, I know what I want. I know what I need. Okay, here are some ways to attain that. So I think that's a pretty big part of every coaching session, especially for people that are struggling with anxiety or panic attacks, because it's easy to get blindsided or, short-sighted by fear and insecurity and doubt. That's like a big part of everyday anxious life. So looking towards, okay, what's important to me? What do I really want here? What are my barriers? What do I need to sort of move toward this value? I mean, it goes a long way in kind of moving towards where we want to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so, I kind of realized we jumped in a little bit and gave a background of where you and I came together as coaches and some of that. But I suppose a lot of people listening may not already know your background, because as you talk about some of the daily life with anxiety and understanding that and how to coach people with it. One of the things that I think, personally knowing your background, that has brought so much talent and ability into coaching people in that regard is being able to kind of model the behaviors and actually model what you're showing them and what you're helping them
Yeah.
To understand because
Yeah.
of your own personal experience with that. So
Exactly.
might be like, would you maybe want to give a little just a background on kind of what that was like for you and what led into you becoming a coach as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I know you're so familiar with my story. I forget that so many other people are not, but
May not be.
may not be. Yeah. So how many years ago now? Almost 10 years ago now, I started, as you know, Kevin, started struggling really heavily with like not only anxiety, but panic attacks and agoraphobia, meaning I had a really hard time leaving my house or being in certain situations, like being at work, being in an airplane, being anywhere that it was like difficult to escape or was uncomfortable. And it was incredibly limiting. I mean, for a time, I didn't leave my house, I didn't leave my bedroom, and for anybody that's had a panic attack, I was having 6, 7, 8, 10 of those a day, just back to back, where I think the best way to describe it is you feel like you're dying when you're having a panic attack.
Yeah.
As a nurse, I can say a lot of ER visits are sort of misinterpreted panic attacks. People do think, oh my God, am I having a heart attack or what's going on? And actually it's like their first full blown panic attack, which can be pretty terrifying. And I know it was for me, and it set me into this sort of anxious cycle, this anxious loop where it just kind of kept building on itself like exponentially. And I had a really hard time finding resources and support that was in a line with my values of health. Like, the traditional medicine is really wonderful and offers us a lot of things. I'm part of the traditional medicine world. But especially when it comes to sort of integrative health, emotional health, we're a little bit lacking. So for me, I eventually became a coach because I wanted to fill that gap. I learned a lot like personally on my own journey and learning how to sort of exit that anxiety cycle and support myself and figure out what the heck was just going on. And so eventually I realized, there's health and wellness coaching, and they're doing what I value and what I care about. And so became a health and wellness coach, and have just focused on stress and anxiety and panic attacks as my little niche.
So something that kind of strikes me as interesting about the type of coaching and the type of folks that you're going to work with a lot, and that we've worked with together a lot, there's definitely a sort of an initial phase of a lot of teaching, a lot of instruction on the surface, it seems like, right? Because people come in, just like you said, people come into the ER for whatever percentage of visits it is, that are people coming in thinking they're having a heart attack or whatever, just like you and I both have been ready. And it's
more than once, I'll say. More than once.
See, I was the one who had that and felt like I needed to go to the ER but was too afraid to go. And so I kept thinking for months that I was having heart problems or something. But so people don't understand it. They don't know coming into a coaching session. Oftentimes with you, they may not really know the science behind what's going on, or they may not have a great understanding. And so there is some value to teaching that. But then also, so what I'm driving at is then for you learned coaching methods,
right?
And you're certified through Well Coaches.
Yep.
Right? And have several years of experience now. And so you're integrating those methods while still trying to teach without just telling someone what to do. So how do you balance that?
Exactly. So my kind of just rule of thumb for me, because it's easy, as a healthcare provider, it's easy to sort of slip into this educator role. And like you said, there is a time and a place for education and teaching. But for me, my rule of thumb is like, I don't really want that to be more than a quarter of the time, because this isn't about, it's really about helping people sort of see for themselves where they're stuck, what's working, what's not working in their lives. Anxiety is very much a symptom. It looks like the problem at first, and we all want to sort of spend a lot of time looking at the problem, picking apart the problem, analyzing, reading, because it does look like the problem. It feels so awful. Anxiety feels awful. It's why so many people cope with alcohol, food, whatever, because it's an uncomfortable place to be. And so for me, it's a gentle reminder, like, okay, there's a little bit of time here for education when it makes sense. Like it's a flexibility, I guess, is kind of knowing when is it time for a little bit of education and teaching, but always sort of moving back towards that place where I'm engaging the client and asking, evocative, open-ended questions to help them see, because any sort of habit change, any sort of sustainable habit change needs to be like self-generated. It's not going to come from me talking at them.
Yeah. No, and it's kind of interesting, as we're talking to obviously coaches that work with all sorts of different health concerns of people's, not just anxiety, but for you having the background of anxiety, being a nurse, being an actual healthcare provider, like there is a time and place where educating is certainly valuable and part of your job, and something
and
that
part
you
of the
offer.
change and part of the change process for them. So the education sometimes plays a piece in the change process, but just a piece, I think.
Yeah. Well, I like to think, you mentioned having to show people kind of like where they're stuck and that sort of thing. We talk about it a lot of times in terms of like helping people to find their blind spots.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, because you're there to help them see, not to like shove them off in this direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Was that something that came pretty natural to you, or that you started doing right away, or
no?
Did you feel like that?
Not right away. I really, before I had more coach training, like I definitely, my personal weakness as a coach was leaning heavily onto like teaching and education. And when I started coach training and sort of looking at myself and why I stick to new habits or what works for me, like it's never when someone tells me this is what you have to do to be okay, or talks at me, like I just, okay, sure, yeah. Like that doesn't engage me or help me make a change. So it was definitely a skill that developed over time. And I still remind myself often, because that's my personal weakness as a coach. It's easy to fall back into, I get so excited about, I'm a nerd. I get excited about information and teaching and things like that. But so, yeah, I constantly remind myself, like, okay, let's move on to like the generative movement moments here and ask these evocative questions and things like that.
Yeah. So you mentioned that it was kind of, learning about coaching and going through the training, but also sort of applying that to yourself, it sounds like, was a big part of understanding the value of not just preaching to someone or kind of telling them what to do. So is that something that you spend a lot of time still on then, is working on yourself? And
I would say it's much more natural now, like kind of self-coaching. Like I recognize when things aren't working for me a lot sooner. My body's really good at telling me. I'm like, whoa, hold on. And it helps me just check into like, okay, what's my value here? What do I care about? What might be helpful? Like I'm much kinder to myself regarding change. And before, it used to be sort of like a big shaming, rigid ritual change for me. Like that's how it used to be. And now I'm able to self-coach, and like sugar was always really sticky for me. That was like anything sugary, delicious, chocolate cake and whatever. Like I would sometimes, like anybody, get caught in that habit of like when I was overwhelmed or sad, like going through grief, like I'd reach for just not one, not two, but like half the cake, not one or two slices. And so I'd get frustrated with myself, like, oh, I did it again. What the heck? And I think when I started applying some of those like, coaching principles, I was able to make lasting change. I was able to see, oh, gosh, I really feel awful at night when I eat that much, sugar or sweets. And I feel bad the next day, and it impacts my mood this way, where suddenly the change starts to feel more effortless. Like that just isn't serving me, and it doesn't feel good, and it's not in line with what I care about and how I want to live my daily life. So yeah, it's definitely a part. I mean, there's small things like that all the time. How I interact with my kids, if something's not working, self-coaching allows me to sort of like check in, redirect, and move toward, a new habit or new behavior without all the shame and all that other stuff that makes change so hard.
I feel like that helps you to understand the people you're working with as well, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
if you're applying it yourself.
Yep, exactly. I think it's just like an opportunity to practice so that I can bring it to the coaching sessions.
Well, and when you say bring it to the coaching sessions, there's times where it's even nice, I think, to literally bring that example in.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I mean, is that something that you do often, is to share, okay, hey, here's where I've been and what my experience has been?
Yeah. It's similar to like how you asked about like the education and teaching piece, like, like where it feels, with coaching, it's sort of like this, it's a little bit of a dance. And so you kind of get a feel for when that might be helpful or when that makes sense. And if it does, I definitely share it too, because I know people often get a lot of value in knowing, hey, I'm not alone in this, like,
yeah.
I hear the word health coach and I'm like, oh, they have it all together. They don't struggle. They don't have, it's nice to see like, no, everyone's just human. Like we all struggle.
Yeah, no, I love that, because it's just that is commonly what you're going to have people come and approach you with. I had somebody just the other day that approached me with the idea of doing some coaching, and it just really felt like, hey, you've got all this figured out. Give me the answers, give me what to do.
Yeah. Yep. That's I think one of the most common questions I get, since I particularly work with like people that are struggling with anxiety and panic attacks. They'll be like, oh, you've mastered anxiety, you must never feel anxious. I'm like, wow, anxious is like, it's a basic human emotion. I do feel anxious. It's just I know how to work through it when it comes up with more ease and awareness, and I know what works for me, and it's a lot easier to move through it without getting, pulled into that anxiety cycle where it starts, where anxiety starts to feel problematic. So I think it's easy to assume, put people on a pedestal, and it's like, we're all in this together.
Yeah, I almost feel like there's a specific value to like intentionally stepping down off of that pedestal too, and showing like, hey, I'm just like you,
Yeah.
I've been there. I have my issues, and I still work through things.
Exactly.
And I think in a way it kind of helps us not to be that, strictly educator. If we would say like, sure, I don't know it all.
Yeah, it's like stepping down from that sort of assumed expert role, and it's like it's more of like it's a mutual role. Like, and coaches and clients, it's it's much more, it's different than like a doctor and a patient. Well, it'd be nice if a doctor and a patient or a therapy and everybody was sort of a little bit more mutual. I don't know how helpful the expert role always is. There's a time and place, but yeah, I think coaching works much better, like you said, when we step down off that pedestal and we're like, hey, we're in this together,
Yeah, I almost wonder if, you mentioned like a doctor and patient situation, if that's maybe a way for that person to step down off the pedestal, even if in your role you're meant to be educating them because you're their doctor. Maybe if you step down into this coaching role for 5 minutes during the 15 minutes that you have in the room with them, in a dream world, right?
Well,
and speak in that way. But because I mean, we've had doctors, we've had all sorts of folks go through like the coaching certification that I run, and that's been really interesting just to kind of see that people are applying coaching skills to their professions in
healthcare setting. I mean, I'm getting my certification as a nurse practitioner right now, and that's my hope, because honestly, my favorite providers have been providers that incorporate much more of like an integrative coaching. role. Those are the providers I feel safe discussing my health concerns with. It's the providers I feel supported by. And, if you have a health ailment, it's a naturally vulnerable place to be. So it's nice to feel like you can connect. Like if someone's in an expert role, you can't connect with them. It's or at least it's much more difficult to connect because they're up here and, you're down here. So I know for me, the providers I value the most have, whether they know it or not, brought in some of these principles of coaching where they just kind of level with you. And I know I appreciate it. And it doesn't make them seem any less knowledgeable to me. It doesn't make them seem any less professional or knowledgeable. I think it's a balancing act. You can still be incredibly proficient in your profession.
I don't know what happened there, but we had apparently some technical difficulties. It must have just been a connection issue somewhere along the line. But we're back with Kelli Walker again. I think it cut you off in the middle of saying you were talking about how coming down sort of off of that pedestal or whatever, coming down and speaking to a client or patient at their level and with your experiences that are similar doesn't necessarily take away from the opinion of that person having the knowledge or the expertise.
Right. No, exactly. It doesn't make them seem any less, sufficient in my eyes. If anything, it enhances trust for me. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially when you're trying to establish that sort of teamwork, like you said, working together on whatever the issue is that you're solving. It's nice to be.
Exactly. I think it's supposed to be, like you say, a team. And I think the old medical model, like part of the, which I think is shifting. It's good to see. I think it is shifting more. But the old medical model was very much like, I'm the expert, you're the patient. I know everything, you know nothing. And now people, knowledge is much more accessible than it ever was. And people are more involved in advocating for their own health. And studies show us that outcomes are far better when patients are involved in their own health and able to advocate for themselves. So again, I think it's just like, it's the lingering bit of an old medical model where it used to be different. And hopefully now we're moving, like you said, a lot of doctors, therapists, healthcare professionals are getting coaching training. So hopefully they're, bringing that to their patient interactions.
Yeah. So there was something else that I thought would be kind of valuable to hear from you about, specifically for coaches, just coaches in general, though, who are not working in anxiety specifically.
Sure.
I've found that no matter what the topic, if you're talking about weight loss and health and making dietary changes, anxiety just comes in, creeps in there very easily. I can't tell you how many, calls, group calls or individual calls that I've been on where we're not here to talk about anxiety necessarily, right? And that comes up.
Yeah.
The example that I would almost kind of lead into that with is you talking about the cake.
Yeah, exactly.
You get overwhelmed and you go and you have the cake or the cookie or the whatever it is. Yep. And that's a food thing, right? That relates to, that example of the type of coaching, most of what I do. But that's coming from a place of anxiety. So what I'm curious is like, have you, what do you think are some kind of valuable things that other coaches that are not necessarily working, specifically on anxiety should know about that, or
about supporting a client that's experiencing those anxious feelings? Well, I think it comes down to sort of like one of the basic principles of coaching, which is just when they're feeling anxious about whether it's like a food choice or sticking to their goals or whatever it might be, it's that sort of kind, mindful presence that we take with clients, because so often we just sort of want to, if we model that, they're able to bring that to themselves. So Anxiety often is associated with things that we value. We value our health. Most people value their health, and if they're coming in and if they're investing money and time into health coaching, obviously it's going to be a top value for them is their health. So some anxiety is obviously going to be natural because they care about it. We get anxious about the things we care about, and that's not abnormal. It more just speaks to what we care about and shows us we have values and things are important to us and such. So I think as a coach, one of the best things we can do is that like mindful, kind presence when someone is struggling with anxiety or a setback or whatever. It's just saying, I hear you, you're sounding like you're struggling right now. And I've been there, and just really being present with them, because then the client's able to bring that to themselves, because so much of what makes us eat that another piece of cake or cookie or whatever is the shame. We're like, well, I already messed up. I might as well just go wild now. Let's just see.
Let's eat the whole thing, so there's none for tomorrow.
So there's exactly. I'm gonna start fresh tomorrow. Tomorrow's Monday. Yeah. I'm gonna start new tomorrow, so I might as well just get this out of the house. And I think just sort of bringing that skill to the coaching session just allows clients to bring that to themselves, because so much of what the issue with anxiety is like we resist it, we fight it, we shame ourselves. There's like a lot of secondary stuff we pile on top of it, right? Like the shame and judging ourselves and trying to think our way out of our habit or whatever it might be. And that mindful presence allows us to sort of move through anxiety with a little bit more ease and just maybe a little bit more comfort, so that we don't always reach for that cake or that cookie.
Yeah. So that, almost some of your response there almost makes me want to circle back around, right, to the beginning. I mentioned just all of the stuff that you've had going on in your life, personally and professionally, the last few years, right? And combining all of that while still being able to coach somebody and help someone. What do you do? Is there a trick that you use? Or something that you do before, after, during a coaching session to be able to be mindful and present?
Honestly, like just 3 minutes before a coaching session, I'll often just take 10 slow, deep breaths. That's not something I could always do. Like when I struggled with anxiety, deep breathing was my nemesis and it was very triggering. But now it's just something I've had a chance to like practice and cultivate, so it feels natural. And that's one thing that helps me before a coaching session is like 10 deep mindful breaths, because it slows down the nervous system. It helps me be more present. It helps me drop my agenda and my ego. It helps me leave my ego at the door, so I'm not like, okay, what do I say next? It allows me to be present without me being insecure or worried or not really hearing them. So that goes a long way for me.
Yeah. Oh, I love what you brought up that. With that, the dropping the agenda and kind of leaving your ego at the door, because you mentioned earlier the idea that we want to be helping them, and finding, that the areas that they need to work on or that they're being stuck. And if you come in with an agenda right off the bat,
there's going to be resistance, right? Like there's going to be resistance right off the bat. And the magic.
Well, I don't know about you, but I can't tell you how many times you come into something and it's like you think that the answer or the problem is going to be one thing, and they discover it's something completely different for them. Totally different. Yep. Yeah. Yep. So that's interesting. That's one of the things that you specifically notice happening as you practice some mindfulness. Very cool. So you said basically just kind of 10 slow deep breaths, and that you find that to be enough. Just kind of basically ground yourself and be. Exactly. Just helps me show up in the way I want to show up, sort of like that. Just that, I call it like sort of like a young mind, like it's like my, just like this, or a new mind or whatever. It helps me show up in that way. And one of the other things it helps with is it helps me set an intention like, okay, remember, there's a time and place for teaching and education. We talked about that, and my personal weakness as a coach is leaning a little heavily on that. And so it helps remind me, and it helps me set that intention. Like, I'm here to show up for them. They know what's best for them. And that's, again, is what helps me check my ego at the door and just
help it be like the most effective coaching session it can be.
So when you're working with someone, and because you just mentioned that they know, potentially what's best for them, does that mean you kind of just let them do any old thing, that they come up with, or are there, you know what I mean? Like, because to some degree, there are things that people, like, maybe they don't know the absolute final answer, but there are things that you can kind of try along the way.
Exactly.
So how much freedom or how much leeway do you give there? I mean, do you let them just kind of try a few things and guide them through that, or versus, you just say, here, let's try this?
So a big part of like the coaching session is like the brainstorming generative moments that, you might hear about in like coaching training. So it's one, nailing down those values, and it's sort of, honestly, I find that people make their own great choices when they realize like what their underlying value is or what their barriers are. And okay. Suddenly it feels a lot more doable for them. They might realize, okay, they're like, I'm really struggling with anxiety. And I'm like, oh, I hear you on that. But what's your biggest value here? What are you wanting to take away in working together? Like, well, I just want to be healthy. And then we kind of talk about, okay, what's really working for you? And is there anything that's not working for you? And they're like, well, maybe that second or third glass of wine. And so I'll say, is that something you're thinking of changing? And they're like, yeah, a little bit. I'm like, okay, how does it sound to pay attention to how you feel, the next morning or the night after having that extra glass of wine? Or then they'll be like, yeah, and also this. And it's like it's like that dance, that we talk about. And so I find people with like just a little bit of like a guided sort of conversation and open-ended questions are really good at discovering what actually really works for them.
Yeah, because I'm, the way I'm hearing that is it sounds like you kind of come in with a little bit of validation of, what they're going through, but then from there get into finding out what their values are, and so that could be values, motivations, what's important to them, why are they doing this. And again, that's something they can apply regardless what you're coaching about, and then help them to see, okay, where are these little areas? And I agree, the same thing, just like you said, you ask somebody, what's something that's maybe holding you back or slowing you down toward these goals? And if it's the glass of wine, I mean, it seems like there's always an answer, not always. There's often an answer that comes right up.
Yep. And people are often surprised by their sort of awareness or their answer. And it just sort of like confirms for me, like people, we get sort of bogged down in daily life and stressors and things like that. But it really does confirm for me, like people know what is like best for them. And it's going to be different, person to person.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about getting bogged down in daily life. I mean, that's one of the things that was so beautiful about, as you pretended to be both the coach and the client there, the example you led us through there was that, the person comes in and they say, hey, this is what's going on. And you sort of validate their feelings and what they're going through, the anxious situation. And then step right on, sort of past that immediate, like, this is the daily life, what I'm bogged down in today, into, okay, what are we working toward?
Exactly. It's like this gentle, you don't want to do it too soon or too late. It's like this gentle sort of shifting. This gentle sort of shifting towards where do we want to go, with all this going on. And, yes, you are feeling anxious, or yes, this is here, but also, where are you wanting to go? What are you wanting to work toward? What's important to you?
Do you have kind of a vision in your mind of when you want to do that in the coaching session, or okay, by 3 minutes in, or by 7 minutes in, I want to?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm supposed to, but no, I don't do. For me, a lot of it is just taking those like coaching, those basic coaching principles, and I mean, you'll hear from like it's a big thing in well coaches too. Like a lot of it is on feel. There's some intuition there, and usually you get a feel for, okay, we've spent a while sort of looking at the problem, right? Like you can kind of feel when you've been there too long, and then you can move and shift towards sort of focusing on the value or what's important to them delicately. Often, for at least for sort of my clientele, like it's ever so delicately, because it is validation an important part too. I wouldn't want to cut that short either.
So now then, once you've established those values, then you've got to kind of start working toward determining some action kind of steps there. And is there a transition?
Yeah. So once the values are established, honestly, the actions are easy. Like it's sort of like the map has been laid down, and people are like, oh, sometimes people are, they know what's important to them, maybe just not quite on the surface. So when that's made available to them, when we see that together, I find that like the actions are just, they sort of naturally, sort of brainstorming actions or way to attain these values and barriers and things like that. It's pretty easy to transition to, because the roadmap's already been laid down.
Yeah. And then, so then how do you work on those with, the actions? I mean, obviously you've got to have some time outside of the coaching session that they're working on those.
Usually like 2 weeks, for 2 weeks. And I know for me, I'll have a little bit of like limited email contact. Everybody's different, but if someone has a question about what they're working on, or they want some clarification, like I'll be accessible or whatever, or they need a reminder what we talked about since I jotted it down. They're like, I lost my notes, or I didn't have my phone. But typically like at the end of the session, they'll define what is really important to them and what they feel like they can spare sort of time and energy to work on that week. And again, that's why I think it has to be up to them, because we all have so little time and energy, especially with each passing year. And it's like, it needs to be, and more kids come, even less so, even less sleep and less energy. So for people, it's just, it has to be sort of what will be worth spending that time on them. Just like anybody that exercises long term, it's something they enjoy. It needs to be something they enjoy and like. And so whatever they sort of determine what they want to work on, like the specific actionable steps they want to take towards their values, they tend to play around with that for 2 weeks. And again, they're often surprised when they come back. Like for me and sort of my specific population, it's really easy to sort of look at anxiety and stay bogged down and focus on the problem. And I think that's anything, like any challenge that comes up. It's easy to get, a little bit short-sighted and just keep staring at the problem. I know that was a big barrier for me. And I think clients they're surprised, like, okay, I can sort of shift my gaze from staring at the problem to where I want to go. And it actually works. There's often a lot of delightful surprise. I'd say I didn't stare at my anxiety all week and think about it all week. When it came up, I just sort of checked in with my values and how I want to move toward them. And that's sort of how it goes, at least in my sessions.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're here to talk about, your sessions.
And they see it for themselves, they just see for themselves how it sort of works to move toward values. And then, there's even less resistance, less and less and less resistance moving forward, because they just see for themselves. And
as they see some successes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned kind of the way time and energy becomes limited and runs out as things get busier. I want to be honoring your time.
I know.
Just really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with us.
Thanks for having me
today. Yeah. I mean, we with the technical difficulties thrown in there and all, we've probably had you for about an hour. So don't want to take up your whole day away from those twins.
I love my kids, but it's nice. I mean, they're actually really fun. They're 2.5. So they're really fun right now and playing outside a lot. And it's finally spring in the great north here. So they really are a lot of fun. But it is nice to, and probably a lot of parents, moms, dads can relate to this. It's still nice to take time to move toward my values. I became a mom, but I still have my own values and things that are important to me. So it's nice to have time to do that too.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great kind of a great note to end on for our coaches out there, to make sure to take some time for your own development and your own values. and not just those of the people you're caring for, whether it's your children, your clients, your patients, your
Exactly. Probably most coaches that are tuning in are in the helping field, and it can be easy to sort of lose sight of our values and our needs.
For sure. Well, so just to share really quickly, in case anybody is interested in more of kind of the anxiety side of things and what you're up to, where can they find you?
They can find me at notanotheranxietyshow.com. I always have to say that so slow. Notanotheranxietyshow.com. So there, I have a classroom with resources. You can find my podcast there, or all sorts of fun things.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for sitting down and talking with us, and have a great day.
You too.
Thanks, everyone.